Let's talk a little bit about collisions again. So oftentimes you'll have assets that are in your scene that already have their own collisions, such as if I go to the props, the default starter content here, I have this chair, and if I want to visualize the collisions, I could turn on my little eyeball here and go to collision. Then you can see this is the collision mesh that came around the chair by default. You didn't have to do anything, it came with it on its own. Now there's times where you may not want this exact collision mesh. You may want the modeler to provide this for you. So let me show you a kind of problem with this. If you wanted your character to jump on the chair, right? So I can jump on the chair and I can't quite seem to jump on the chair. Let's see if I can get on top. Yeah, so I can get on top. But if I come off a little bit, I'm sliding and doing this weird what's going on. And that is because I'm eventually coming off of that. You can see that slanted surface there. This is my collision mesh and my character is sliding down that. So sometimes you can modify this in Unreal. And I have a video going over that in complete detail of how to do it in Unreal. But what if you're getting assets from someone else and you don't want to do it in Unreal? So let's talk about how to do it in a third-party software such as Blender or Maya. I'm going to use Blender just because it's easy for you to access and follow along if you want. So pop over to Blender and open Blender. If you go to blender.org, you can just download and use Blender. So I'm going to get rid of a couple of assets here. I'm going to add, just because it's kind of complex and easy and already existing, I'm going to go to the add menu and add the monkey head named Suzanne. So if I take Suzanne here and I just do an export of an FBX. So I'm not adding any quote collision geometry at this point yet. I'm just going to export FBX, send it to my desktop, and I already have one named Suzanne, so I'm going to overwrite that. And I want to, right now Suzanne's the only thing in my scene, but if you have multiple things, there are times you need to check this box. Make sure you do selected objects. And there's Suzanne. I'm going to do export and import into Unreal, said Suzanne. Do a little import here. I'm going to leave all the settings at default here, but let's take a look at the collision in particular before I do. So down here, you'll see the defaults are import collision. If I hover over that, so read that. It says, if enabled, custom collision will be imported. I have not made custom collision yet. We'll get into that next. But if enabled and there is no custom collision, which is our current case, a generic collision will be automatically generated. If disabled, you'll get no collision at all. So let's leave everything at the default. So we will have it automatically made for us because we didn't make one. And this is the type of collision, whatever you call it, algorithm, or however it, see it says there 18 sides total. It will use this to generate the collision. If I was to set it to something like box, I would only get a box when it imports. And we can do that in a second so you can see that. But I'm going to leave it at the default and import. So here is Suzanne. If I double click to inspect the object and turn on collision, so a little eyeball, simple collision. So this is what got generated for my monkey by default. Now that might be fine for what you're doing, but if you want your character to be able to stand exactly on the ear and not slide off, or it's a giant statue and you want it to crawl through this area here and not run into things, then you might want to have a little more detailed collision. Now you could, if I, like I showed in my other video, there is this idea of a complex collision, but that might be too much for what you need. And you may, again, not want to deal with this in Unreal. You may want your modeler or modeling department to do it for you if you're not also the modeler, or maybe you are the modeler and you just want to deal with it in your other software. You can do that. So let's go ahead and close this. And so that's what you get by default if you don't do anything else. But let's talk about how, because it does get a little picky, how you would do that in something such as Blender. So you got some naming conventions and other things to deal with. So I'm going to delete Suzanne for now. I'm also going to delete this chair out of my scene at the moment. And let's go back over to Blender. So to make custom collision geometry, what you need to do is create the geometry. So I'm going to add we'll just start with a sphere. Let's just add a simple icosphere, and we'll go ahead and leave it at this size just to show you what it's going to look like. And let's go ahead, and the most important thing here is you need to have very specific naming convention. So the naming convention is when you have a piece of geometry you want to use as a collision object, you have to prefix it and then name it exactly as your object is. So here I have Suzanne is my actual monkey head, and then UCX, and we'll go over this in a minute, but I'm going to use UCX for starters, and then we'll look at the other options. You do have other prefix options. And then what you got to do is select them both, do your export as FBX, and I'm going to name it the same, and again, make sure you have selected objects if you have more than the two things in here in your scene, and go ahead and export. So now popping back over to Unreal, let's re-import Suzanne. Look at our default values here. So here, this is what's going to happen. The custom collision will be imported. Now let's take a second look here. So import collisions according to mesh name. So if enabled, meshes with certain prefixes will be imported as collision primitives. So this is the important part that has to do with naming convention. So notice I can't point at it because I have to hover, but notice those 4 different prefix types. So UBX is if you want it to be a box, and then UCP capsule, USP for sphere, and then UCX for convex, meaning convex versus concave. Concave, your surface curves in. Convex, it goes out like a pair of glasses. The outer side of glasses, not the inside of glasses. We have it currently set to UCX. We could have done sphere, but not really. It depends on what you want the output to be. So let's see what happens if we don't change anything using UCX. And go ahead and import. And let's just double click and take a look at, again, our collision. All right, so here, this is what it imported as your collision, and this is almost exactly your mesh. Now, it's not quite exactly your mesh. Unreal is still converting it into its own format, so this isn't exactly your mesh. You can modify this if you want. So, you could use R for scale it and make changes and move it. So if you do need to make subtle adjustments, you still can. But again, the point of this is so that it's completely handled in your modeling package, but you can still change the mesh here. So here I've customized and brought in my specific geometry for collision. So let's go back into our Blender scene here, and maybe we want this to fit a little bit better because, it doesn't currently. So let's go ahead and scale our sphere down a little bit so it's a little more inside the head. I'm not going to worry too much about specifics. And then we want to add additional geometry here. So let's make let's just do a cube. And we'll use a cube. I'm just using the icons in case y'all aren't that familiar with Blender. It's a little easier just to get used to, instead of using all the hotkeys, you can use your move, rotate, and scale over here. So I'm just aligning this up with the front part of the face, barely, kind of. Oh, actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to show you something that will catch you off guard if you're not aware. All right, so let's say, let's look at a little side view here. How much more do I have to do to scale it? Something about like that. Again, this is just messing around here. So, so now I have 2 shapes. I have this one, and I have this one back here. So when you have more than one shape that you want to be part of your custom collision, what you got to do now is, I'm going to also call it UCX. I could call it UBX. Let's do that just so you can see that it works because it's a box. Some of this kind of isn't as important. However, what you want to do is once you start having more than one piece of geometry, you need to start giving a little suffix here so it knows to bring them all in together as a set. O2 and UBX because it's a box, O1. So now you can select all your objects and do your export. FBX, Suzanne, export. Back over here, import. Going with all the defaults again. And let's look at Suzanne with the collisions. All right, so now we have one collision, and another collision. So this is getting closer, and it's just showing how you can bring in multiples. Now, what if you want this tapered to fit the chin a little bit better? So say now you want to customize that shape. This is where you might get caught off guard if you don't know what it's looking for. So let me show you what I mean. If I come over here and let's edit that box shape a little bit. Let's add a couple loop cuts here just because I want to taper that in. We'll do one more. And let's go back to object mode. So now let's say I want to modify this individual shape. Go to transparent mode for a second, front facing. And let's see. Select this, and actually just these. And I'm going to scale. Scale this in, just trying to fit the face just barely a little bit better, nothing crazy. All right, so something a little more like that. All right, so if you wanted to really get picky, which I shouldn't because it's not that important at the moment. So look at this shape here, and you might think, okay, it's fine. I could bring those in a little bit, but anyway, you get the idea. You know what? Maybe I will do that. Sorry. Hold on. Let's just do this really quick. Let's go extreme there. All right, good enough for now. Right, so the point being that you want your character to be able to get in here and here if this is a giant monkey head. Yes, I haven't covered the ears, but that's just takes time. Don't have time at the moment. Let's do a back to object mode. Let's do another export. Select all your shapes. Our naming convention is still fine. Let's do an export. And Suzanne, export. Now, popping back over here, this isn't going to be what you expect, likely, but that's why we're going over this. So, import and take a look. Double click, and let's look at the collisions. Oh, what did I forget? It must not like the fact that that wasn't a box. That actually isn't the whole point of what I was going to show you. I was kind of expecting to see the quote box represented here, even though it's not a box. Looks like it is that particular. It says that's not a box. So let's fix our naming convention here. We'll call that UCX because it's convex now. It's getting complicated. It's not just a simple box. Select everything. File, export. Popping back over here, ditch that Suzanne, re-import. Take a look at our collisions. All right, so we have two collisions. We have this, our original sphere shape, and then we have this, which notice isn't matching the shape that I just made. And you might say, why is that doing what it's doing? How come I don't have the collision following the shape of the face like I made over here in Blender? What's going on? So an important part of all this, and this might be your key takeaway, that is why you might be watching this video, because you might be frustrated because you're seeing this exact kind of thing happening. So convex versus concave. This is a concave face surface here, so it's caving in. So you can't actually do conversions from a concave surface like this, or concave object, and have that hold all the way over into Unreal. It will round it out for you. It will fill in those concave surfaces with straight lines like you see over here. So what it's doing, it's filling that in because it can't, there isn't a way to have a surface like that create a little pocket like we have from our original. So it's making the best that it can, and it's making it a convex surface. So how do you get around this? Well, I mean, it's not really getting around, you just can't do that. So what we can do over here, let's go back to our shape. Let's go to do a little modification. What you really need to do, if you do need this to be concave of sorts, is what I'm going to do is you really just need another piece of geometry. So I'm just going to tuck these up here. I'm no pro modeler, which is why it's taking me a bit here. So I have that shape, and I'm going to add another shape, another cube, and let's scale that down. And we're just going to use another shape to represent this little chin area here. What are we looking at here? Oops, missed there. So bring this over here, up a bit. I know there's hotkeys, but it's actually kind of clunk. Okay, so then this cube, I mean, I could call this UBX because it is a box, or if you just want to always call everything UCX, you can do that as well. Then you don't have to think, is this a box or a capsule or a sphere? Now, if you do want a capsule, then call it, what is it, UCS. But I'm just going to call it this for now. All right, so we got bad typing. Goodness. There. All right, so we have 3 different shapes for our collision called UCX, and we have the original Suzanne. So let's select everything. File, export, FBX, Suzanne, export. Delete that one, import a fresh Suzanne, leaving it as the defaults. Double click. Let's take a look. All right, so now we have our 3 separate pieces here that are now available. So now what that means is, if I close this and I bring a Suzanne in here and make Suzanne big, so you can see all the collision geometry here is a little bit more form-fitting, so that if I come in here, I can, oh, well, she's not quite big enough. But you can see I can tuck in there a little bit and get around there. So I can get, now the ear didn't have any, right? So that means I can go into the ear, right? There's no collision in the ear. So if I wanted collision in the ear, I would have to go into either hand do it in Unreal or ask my modeler, aka myself, to come in here and model a ear. Now, one of the ways that I found this whole convex system was kind of being an issue was I was hoping I could make a really low res, you know, in Blender here you have the ability to, like if I make a copy of it, right, so here's my copy. I have a Suzanne and a Suzanne 01, and maybe the original Suzanne was a very high quality mesh, so if I add modifier, generate subdivision surface, bump it up to 3, apply. All right, so here's my really smooth model. Now I don't want, in Unreal, I don't want to use that as my high res as my source of collision to follow it, because that would be a lot of detail. So my thought was I would just make a low res version to use as a collision, right, and call this the whole UCX, and it worked in the sense that it exported. But let me just show you again, prove the point. Now the theory is good, right? You know, like here's my high res and I want to use that as my collision because it's nice and low res to save memory and all those gamey sort of things. But we're gonna have that same issue where even though it, you know, in theory you'd think it would work. So export the FBX, Suzanne, overwrite that, come back over here, ditch the old one. It's gonna do what you think it's gonna do, because I just talked about. Come on, delete. The heck? Oh, I'm in gameplay. Delete, bring in a new Suzanne. And even though the original geometry was nice and form-fitting and low res, when I bring it in and take a look, you'll see that it created a giant shell around it because of convex versus concave. So if you have concave geometry, when you bring it in, it's going to pull it out like this. So you're probably going to have to hand build individual shapes and collect them all together when you need a little more complex shape. Now let's look at another thing just for kicks while we're here. I'm going to delete that, and using the exact same setup just because it'll doesn't really matter what I have incoming necessarily at the moment, so you can see what this option does. So you have a setting here, fallback collision type. So when it does the, even though there is a custom collision here, it is still going to use it. If I switch this to box and import, what it's going to do is it's going to use the box for its collision. So I had my own custom collision, even though it said if there is no custom collision. I do have a custom collision, but it's treating it and making it a box instead of the 18 blah blah blah, whatever that other setting was. So that's what that last setting does as well. In case you want to have your things oversimplified, you can do that as well. Hopefully this discussion has just let you know a little bit about how to set up your either Blender, Maya, Houdini, whatever you're creating in your modeling package. Pay attention to the prefix. If you only have one item, you can do a prefix without a suffix. If you have more than one shape, then you need to add a 01, 02, 03 as your suffix, and then just bundle them all together in a single FBX and import them over to Unreal to get your character brought in with custom collision.